My sadness lingers on. How can it not linger on? I find that my emotions on our current situation in Israel, the pain, the questions, the moral questions, the dilemmas, the entire story in Israel and Gaza, and then here and around the world, but here the anti-Semitism that surrounds us, all of this seems to run so deep within so many of us, so deep within me, that I find I need stories to nourish my soul as I seek to understand why it's so deep within me. Why have I not really had a full night's sleep in over a month? So at first I thought I was going to write what was going to be a kind of complicated theological sermon to examine this, and then I threw it all away. It's there on my computer. But I'll begin this evening with an old story that I was raised on, that I kind of rewrote, but this is a basic story that I was raised on. Long, long ago, in a distant place, there was a family that lived in a house that was, to their eyes, the most beautiful home imaginable. It was, for them, the fulfillment of a great life dream. The family wrote poetry about their home's delightful fragrances. There were odes to its splendid rooms and furnishings. They delighted in the views of the surrounding terrain from the windows and the terraces. And every poem, every verse, every image was recorded in a kind of scrapbook that the family kept and added to regularly. Years passed. The family grew, the family shrank. There were quarrels in the family, there were divisions, and even with all this, the home passed from one generation to another, until the family fell on hard times. And the hard times eventually grew desperate, and finally, the eviction notice came. Hard, shocking, unyielding. A mighty foreign enemy had seized the entire neighborhood as far as one could see in any direction and even beyond. And this enemy took hold of the home and evicted the family. They destroyed part of the house. They trampled the treasured gardens, the kitchen, the ultimate family gathering room, which held many secrets and recipes and codes, was laid utterly to waste by this unyielding foe. A remnant of the family escaped with its special scrapbook intact. They became a wandering family. The scrapbook survived, and those parts of the family that were not able to get any of its precious pages held on to the stories they remembered, and they told the stories to their children. Years passed, more years passed, and more years passed. The descendants of the family had spread to many different lands, but the story remained in their hearts and minds and were passed along continually, parent to child. The memories of the old home were always in the air and on their lips, especially when times were hard. Tried as they might to be part of the people around them, to feel comfortable in a different house, they never quite fit in. And the children of each generation went to bed singing songs from the scrapbook, dreaming of the house that was far away, both a dream and yet very real. And then one day, as if out of nowhere, but in a deeper sense, not at all out of nowhere, the now far-flung family began to move back to reclaim the old, new dream home. My story continues, but I'll stop here. This story, in various tellings and retellings, is how I learned Judaism and Zionism. It's how I learned to be a Jew. It's how I learned to know that Israel was my home, even when I had never, ever been there, until the summer after I became bar mitzvah. Recently, when I thought to write a sermon analyzing this theology, as I said, nothing I wrote compared to this story. So if you want to understand what this beautiful home, what this beautiful word Zionism means at its root, it simply means that we Jews are part of an extended family, and our family story is a home story. It's a tale of home. Even as we are exiled from our land, we took with us a book. What my story calls a scrapbook, of course, is our Bible. We continued to read and teach, sing and compose stories and songs about our home and our eventual return. The Bible became our diary of remembrance and our eventual compass for how to return. And to this day, the Bible remains, I think, the best guidebook to anyone who travels in Israel. So many place names are biblical. Don't ask me to list my favorites because you'll be here for far too long. But anybody that's been with me on a Temple Micah tour bus in Israel knows I always have my Tanakh with me. And when we pass a road sign that I don't recognize, I say, oh, I know that place is in the Bible, and I begin to thumb through. And Noam, my friend and our guide, will say, don't have to look it up. It's a book of Joshua, this chapter. He'll tell me, and I'll look it up. But even with all of this, our own story can be hard to understand because this Zionist idea is simultaneously obvious and yet also somehow complicated. We're home, but we're not home. We've been gone for so long, but that remains our place. And so we can see how David Ben-Gurion put it over 75 years ago. And yes, now for those of you who know this place well, the beginning of a kind of long quote. Ben-Gurion's words from 1946 as he struggled to make the case for the creation of a Jewish state. The first sentence he spoke to the Anglo-American Commission. I recognize the intellectual difficulty of our case. I recognize the intellectual difficulty of our case. He went on. Again, Ben-Gurion. There is no precedent for the history of the Jewish people, and there is no parallel to the fate of this land. No precedent for the special significance this land has for us. There is no parallel to the relations between our people and this land. It is unique. People think in analogies, and when they are faced with a new phenomena, they prefer to deny the existence of what they do not understand. We see that all around us in the world today. But Ben-Gurion goes on. But it remains a fact, nevertheless. You have the unique case of the homeless Jewish people and their historic homeland. One reason why Jews came over here is love of Zion, a passionate love strong as death. There is no parallel to that in all of human history. What is the source of this love, he asks? A man may change many things, his religion, his wife, his name. There is one thing which a man cannot change, his parents. And then this sentence. The parents of our people are this land. It is unique, but there it is. And then he goes on, speaking to the Anglo-American Commission, keep in mind. More than 300 years ago, a ship by the name of the Mayflower left Plymouth for the New World. It was a great event in history. I wonder how many people know the date when that ship left Plymouth, how many people were on the ship, and what kind of bread they ate when they left. More than 3,300 years ago, the Jews left Egypt, more than 3,000 years before Mayflower, and every Jew in the world knows exactly the date we left, the 15th of Nisan. The bread they ate was matzah. Up to this day, all of the Jews in the world on the 15th day of Nisan eat matzah and tell the story of the Exodus. They tell what happened and finish with L'Shana Haba'ah B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. My family reads this passage at our Seder table every year as we tell our story. Ben-Gurion's speech in 1946 to the Anglo-American Commission that had been tasked with making a recommendation to their governments on the future of Palestine as the United Nations considered the matter. As we all know, in 1946, Palestine was under British mandate, still bound by the British White Paper policy, which from 1939 onward limited Jewish emigration to Palestine to approximately 700 people per month. The British imposed those restrictions because of the great pressure from the Palestinian Arab community, which did not want to allow Jews into Palestine. You heard that correctly. At the height of the Shoah, the British limited the number of Jews who could enter Palestine to 700 per month. This policy remained in force until after the war, all the way until May 1948, when the British mandate ended and the new state of Israel unlocked the gates for the refugees from Europe. But Ben-Gurion's phrase remains haunting. There is no parallel to the relations between our people in this land. People think in analogies, and when they are faced with the new phenomena, they prefer to deny the existence of what they do not understand. This remains the nub of the matter. And Ben-Gurion's wisdom reminds us how hard our story is to understand, especially for outsiders. This story is centered on Torah. Torah is centered on the land of Israel as home, and what Ben-Gurion calls the parents of our people are this land. There is no real reading of the Bible without understanding this attachment to the land of Israel. It is deeply embedded into our psyche of who and what we are. And I think it can be so deeply embedded that we ourselves sometimes don't see it. It is a kind of invisible foundational theology, even of so-called ethnic Jews or cultural Jews, who say to themselves proudly, to me, I'm not really religious, Rabbi, let alone Jews like us who are religious Jews, who come into this house to pray. We understand, but we don't understand at the same time, what is the source of this deep mystical attraction? When Jews lack the language to describe who they are, who we have a hard time, an impossible time, telling this to the outside world. It is the simple story of Jewish familyhood. And like every family, it is a story of home. It is even deeply embedded in what is arguably the most universal of biblical books, the Psalms. I'm not going to read to you all the Psalm texts, but just kind of doing a little search, I found 19 Psalm texts. I could have gone on, and the sermon would have been forever. But if you want to Google, just kind of Google Land of Israel Psalms, Zion Psalms, Jerusalem Psalms. It is all over there. The most universal book of the entire Bible is filled with this sense of Jewish home. This is in us. This is in us. And sometimes we have to fight for them. And that discussion will have to come at another time when I address those important questions. What are the limits to the way we can fight? What does it mean to fight what we call evil? And what is evil anyhow? In coming weeks, I wish to address all of these questions, but for this evening, I simply wanted to establish the why. What is this land for us? So I'll end with words that never cease to bring tears to my eyes. The beautiful Israeli writer, David Grossman, gave us all this gift. A quote: Israel is the only place in which a Jewish person can live with the vital ingredients of the history and culture and mental life of all of the generation of Jews that have preceded him. This is the place in which a Jewish person can implement the values and ideals that his culture has crystallized, and it is the only place in which he can do this in the language in which his identity was created over generations. Then he goes on, living in Israel is for me a spiritual adventure. My children play and love and fight in a language that no one spoke for 2,000 years, but for them is full of life and is taken for granted. Were Abraham the patriarch, who would now be 4,000 years old, to sit down for supper at my house, he would understand the greater part of the Hebrew spoken by his then, he writes, my 5-year-old daughter. What a wonder that is. End of quote. What a wonder that is indeed. What a wonder we need to preserve. Od lo avda tikvatenu. We have not yet lost our hope. Shabbat shalom.